Hello, my name is Lynn McCann. I am the owner of Reach Out ASC Autism Support Consultants. We're a team of specialist teachers based in Lancashire in the middle of the UK, and we are bringing this webinar to you to just give a general introduction to helping people understand autism, a general overview, updated information, which is a good starting point for anyone who wants to know about autism. I am the author of 2 books for teachers, talking about the strategies and support that can help autistic children in school, aimed mainly at primary school and secondary schools, but also will cover middle schools and specialist schools as well. What I'm really proud about in these books is that it's full of children's voices. So the quotes from the children about their experience of school are an important part of this book. You can get in touch with us on our website, and you can follow us on our social media. Our website is full of free resources and articles in particular. So if you look at the top band there, if you look at resources, you can drop down to look at our free resources, printable resources, downloadable on that tab. And also our articles cover all sorts of details and blogs from autistic people, from our experience, and covering lots and lots of different subjects. So have a look at those, bookmark it, and go and find out more. We're going to start with the idea of a spectrum and of also the word neurodiversity, which is used quite a lot in current times. So I just kind of want to say that neurodiversity is about the whole human spectrum, meaning that all brains work differently. And there is a word neurodivergence which is being used, which describes people whose brains work in ways that differ from the majority. And it could be like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, and others. And often people can have those diagnosed together because we're getting so much better at understanding these conditions. We're seeing so much crossover and so many links between perhaps autism and ADHD, for example, or being autistic and dyslexic. So autism is considered part of that neurodivergence spectrum because it represents a natural variation in the way the brain functions, processes information, and experience of the world, especially in areas such as social interaction, communication, sensory perception, and thinking styles. And we're going to unpick that a little bit more. Each person is a different person. And the reason I've chosen this visual here is that each one of those dots represents an autistic person. The spectrum isn't less autistic or more autistic or severe autism and mild autism. And we don't talk about high and low functioning really either, because all those terms are misrepresenting the actual experience and understanding of each autistic person. Each person has a whole range of abilities and interests and difficulties which we need to get to know about individually. So it is a spectrum, a circular spectrum with people changing and developing all through their lives. It includes a wide range of experiences, abilities, and also those support needs. So some autistic people have significant learning disabilities. Some may be non-speaking, and some may need 24/7 support in their daily life. Others may be academically able, highly verbal, and appear to cope well in structured settings, but often by masking, which is hiding their true feelings or struggles to fit in socially. And that can be really exhausting and lead to burnout. A small number of autistic people are savants who show exceptional skills in areas maybe like music, memory, maths, or art, creativity, but that is actually quite rare. And some process language, what we call Gestalt style. So that means they learn and use language in chunks or scripts rather than building meaning from individual letters, sounds, and then words. And often that is linked to echolalia of repeating phrases before they learn to break them down individually. So the whole spectrum of autism is huge. And as I said, each autistic person is an individual. So, despite that diversity, all autistic people share some course traits, and that includes differences in social communication. There may be anxiety when there's unpredictability, repetitive behaviors or stimming that regulates them. They might have intense interests and passions and sensory sensitivities, like being overwhelmed by noise, lights, or touch. Many autistic people share a preference for routine, and they may really struggle when there's change or uncertainty. So, what unites them is not how much support they need, but a fundamentally different way of experiencing the world, one that affects how they think, feel, and interact with others. And this is really important that we understand it. It's from understanding autism is about understanding the individual person that we know. So the question remains is, why are so many people now autistic? It's that quite a lot, and it's quite a political hot potato at the time of recording this. And in recent years, we've gone from statistics of around 1 in 100 people are autistic to 1 in 36. There's many, many multifaceted reasons for that. There isn't anything particularly causing autism like vaccines and things that are again are used to degrade autistic people in the media. That has been thoroughly disproven. But it can cause a lot of stress for families thinking that they have caused autism. What we know is that there is much better rates of diagnosing, there is much better understanding, and there are always been autistic people in society. And it's not a sudden, it's actually years and years of general understanding of improved services and lots more autistic voices being heard so that we understand that there are a lot more autistic people than were originally thought. And again, we know that autism is genetic, and therefore it's always been part of the human neurodivergence and neurodiversity. So it isn't that, don't be afraid by what you read in the media. This is just naturally understanding people who are autistic. We have better research. So, and the research that is being done currently is including more autistic voices. So we're listening and understanding the experiences of autistic people. It does run in families, and that actually most families look at their relatives, they look at their ancestors and see so many autistic traits. And we often find that parents are being diagnosed autistic because their children were, and they realize how similar they are. And for many, many years, we've missed the girls and the other maskers. We'll talk about that more later. But what that means is that a lot of the research originally and the diagnostic assessments were very male-based. And so the girls were missed or misdiagnosed. Lots of families now have access to better information online, and therefore we know that that includes being able to have a better understanding of their child and want then to have that identified through an assessment. And interestingly, a lot of autistic people say that we live in such a loud, busy, and demanding society that's on 24/7. The internet and everything is actually causing more distress for autistic people, and therefore they seem like they have more needs. Whereas maybe in the past, maybe 50, 100 years ago, they may have not found the society so demanding and overwhelming. There is better awareness and diagnostic systems now, which also includes looking at how we diagnose girls in some areas. And again, we learn so much from autistic people sharing their stories. And again, that makes people more aware and understanding of what autism is. It's really important as well to remember that there are autistic people in every culture and society. Again, it's a human difference in the way the brain works, different just from the majority, that's all. And in many cultures, including, Western UK, there is still stigma, misinformation, and discrimination. Autistic people are less likely to be in employment, have good healthcare, education, and are more vulnerable to early death. So it's really important that we understand, we know how to affirm, support, and give this the right environments for autistic people to thrive because they have that capability and potential. It's a demand on our education, our health systems, all things in systems in society have to be a lot more flexible. The language we use around diagnosis really has to change. It makes me weep when I look at these words. I made this word cloud out of the diagnostic criteria. And if you'll see there, the words are very, very negative. And unfortunately, a lot of autistic people come to diagnosis when they're already in crisis, and they've had a long, long wait. And when they hear these kind of words around abnormal failure deficits, they have a huge impact on their well-being. They often feel worthless, bad, broken, dumb. These are the kind of words that young people say to us, and it isn't fair. So we have to challenge systems, families, schools, individuals to say, we have to flip the language that we're talking about autism. To really respect people. So we're going to again discover that as we go along as well. I love this little thing for here from Raylene Dundon, looking at how we can just change neurodiversity affirming practice, which really includes how we can be affirming of autism within whatever setting, whether it's our family, our school, our workplace. And it is about, presume people's confidence, promote their autonomy, respect their communication style, be informed by neurodivergent voices, take a strength-based approach, honour the neurodivergent culture, and tailor the support to individual needs. Now, for me, because we do this every day, it's not rocket science, particularly starting with a strength-based approach, an interest-based approach can make a huge difference to an autistic person's life. One of the first people to really help me understand autism was Donna Williams, way back in 1996 when she wrote in her books, right from the start, from the time someone came up with the word autism, the condition has been judged from the outside by its appearances. And what's one of the biggest difficulties that autistic people face is that people are trying to judge their behaviour, not really understanding the kind of processing or thoughts and experiences they have on the inside. We're going to unpick that because that is what's really important. So it is not a behaviour problem, and behaviours that people see, or those appearances of what people do and how they act, are all clues about how that person is coping, not how they are autistic, and that's really important because often we are called into schools because of really poor behaviour, perhaps, and all we see is distress and anxiety, and so that's really important to understand. So the language we use, there's lots of words out there, and the official diagnostic criteria in the DCM and is autism spectrum disorder. Again, working with autistic people for so long, I really don't like the word disorder, and it pathologizes and medicalizes, who they are. Unfortunately, those words are used because then people need them to access support. So there's a lot wrong with our medical model around autism. An autism spectrum condition for a while was used as a little bit more representative and a little bit more respectful, but actually currently there has been many surveys asking autistic people how they prefer to be referred to. And in professional circles, there's a lot about person first language. So we might say person with autism. And interesting, I put that little picture there because one autistic person I know said, it's not as if I carry my autism around with me in a bag. So Generally, autistic people have said they prefer autistic, and that's why we use that language as our preferred language as well. Like anything, I always respect somebody and ask them what they prefer, but generally we try not to use ASD or ASC anymore, because again, language is always evolving and we're moving on. So what we're going to do is unpick the diagnostic criteria, which roughly covers four main areas. Again, it's a little bit more in depth when you look at the criteria, but when we're looking at working with autistic young people, we help them understand who they are and try to sort of see how their differences work in these four areas, because again, this is the diagnostic kind of areas that are looked at, but also adding on all their interests, their skills, their experiences, and maybe other conditions they might have as well, such as dyslexia or something else as well. There can be a dual diagnosis of autism and ADHD. Again, there isn't time to go into that and how they might kind of rub up against each other a little bit. But if you want to come or listen to my presentation on understanding ADHD, which will be along with this series, then, have a look at that as well. So we're going to unpick this a little bit. And again, we're trying to think of differences rather than deficits and disorder, and try and kind of understand the range of autism communication styles, social interaction styles, sensory processing, and thinking differences. So, what might autistic communication be like? Again, you've got to get to know the person and what their autistic communication is like and understand them. But generally, there is a whole range of different types of communication styles. So, let's have a look at some of those. Now, there are autistic people who are non-speakers, and that is whether because that part of their brain has not developed speech or whether they are situationally mute. That can happen as well, can be for different reasons. Some don't develop speech until much later than other children, or even into adulthood. And some autistic people might communicate more effectively with using something like what we call AAC. It's augmentative and alternative communication, which could be speech to text on an iPad or typing it in and it speaks for them. It can be apps that actually communicate for them. It can be eye gaze technology. Or it could be simply just gestures, sign language, or just writing or drawing to you. Lots of different ways. And again, we have to tune into that person's communication. There is also something called Gestalt language processing, which we're just starting to get to know about and learn about. And that's where some autistic individuals learn language in chunks or scripts. They might repeat whole phrases from the TV or conversations. And each of those phrases mean something to them, and it does take us time to learn the meaning from us, and it can be seen quite random, but actually it can, once we tune into that and know what the child or adult is saying, it can really open up a lot of communication. If Gestalt language processing develops, it can then kind of be broken down into individual words and more meaning behind it, and more adaptation. But that also is different in different people. Echolalia is the repetition of words or phrases heard from others. It can be immediate or it can be delayed, and it has many purposes, like it can be self-regulation, saying something over and over again, bringing peace and calmness and order to the situation. It can help with processing, expressing needs, or just connecting with people. It can be a stim where the person really likes the sound of the word and keeps going over it, and so on. Now, interestingly, echolalia can get quite sophisticated. So even autistic individuals who mask, which is hiding their traits, may rely on echolalia phrases or scripts that they've learned to quietly or subtly navigate social interactions. We talk about receptive, so the language that we speak to the autistic person, again, there can be quite differences in this, in that many autistic people do understand language quite differently. They much rather have you say what you mean because they might need that language to be very direct and literal. So that means they may struggle with things like idioms and sarcasm, jokes, and the inference or hidden meaning behind words. And also, it's about processing the speed of what you're saying to them, and how much you say in one sentence. So, some autistic people do prefer you to be quite direct, short sentences, just because it's easier to process, and giving them pauses in between speaking as well. It can be even worse when there's a noisy, busy, or unpredictable environment or any sensory overload. It can be very difficult to take language in. Expressing their own language can be very different. Again, for autistic people, some can talk very much, and be very insightful and explain things in great detail. Others can become situationally mute with, particularly, we find that with those who mask when they're feeling overwhelmed and their ability to talk just does stop. So hyperlexia can be common in some autistic people, and that's where they teach themselves to read very, very early on, and very fluently at a young age, and have a real strong memory for written words. And this can be a difficulty when children can read, but they don't connect with phonics at all. And, we would go with their reading ability, because what they can struggle with is the comprehension of the words or the text. And therefore, it's important to support that. Some autistic people have very advanced vocabulary and use very rich or even sometimes formal vocabulary. Often they've built that up from their special interests, and their conversation skills might be seem quite one-sided, that they talk about what they want, and find it difficult to share topics. What can also happen is that they're just really struggling to know how to cope in that conversation, and it's safe and easy to talk about what they like, but also what they like brings them joy. And why do you not want to share your joy? So that interest-based speech can really show us with some deep knowledge about their interests, and for the autistic person can be a real powerful form of connection and their self-expression. It's important we make assumptions about intelligence. So speaking ability is not a measure of intelligence. We can have non-speaking or echolalic individuals who have high cognitive abilities, and we can have those who can talk very well, have lots of high vocabulary, but actually struggle with the cognition around and meaning around that. So we do assume competence. We offer multiple ways to communicate to all autistic people and support their authentic expression. Next, we look at that social interaction. What is autistic social interaction like? So there may be many, many different communication styles with other people in autistic people. Unfortunately, in any society, there are lots of unwritten rules about how you communicate or interact with different people. A really simple example is, you might not talk to your teacher the same way as you do your friend, and you might use different language, and you might say things to your friend you wouldn't dare say to a teacher. However, it can be very difficult for an autistic person to pick up on all the different ways they should be or are expected to communicate to different people, and therefore just talk to everybody the same. Or they may shut down or become mute if they're not sure. So we often find that autistic people communicate more directly, honestly, and with less emphasis perhaps on tone, facial expressions, or body language, and maybe really concentrating on the actual words. They may struggle to read the social context. Some work around this has been done by Peter Vermeulen. And again, this is not every autistic person, but those unspoken rules and also the clues around them about what is going on, which can quickly change a situation from being safe to unsafe. For example, if another person comes into the building, or if somebody says something and somebody's upset, understanding why. All those kind of context specific things can be hard to pick up and can cause a lot of confusion and anxiety. One of the biggest things our autistic young people and friends say is that the unpredictability of others causes the most anxiety. So, neurotypical people might seem to an autistic person as being very inconsistent, very vague, socially complex, and making interactions just too complicated or exhausting. And it can be hard to trust them because you don't know what they're going to do next. And, particularly if they are somebody who jokes a lot or uses sarcasm, it can be very difficult to keep up with the pace of all that as well. Group size within that other people can be a big indicator of whether the autistic person is going to be able to cope or not. Some like to get lost in a huge crowd and not have to kind of interact very much. Others find crowds totally overwhelming because there's too much unpredictability within that. It's often a big aspect of social interaction is the sensory overwhelm in those social spaces. So, as I said earlier, we live in a very noisy, crowded, highly stimulating world. The environments that they might want to go in can make it hard to focus on what's going on in the people because the environment is shouting into their brain. So, there's not much processing left to think about the people and interacting with them. Double empathy is around the kind of social disconnecting happening both ways. It's not autistic people's fault. They do have a lot of insight and empathy to other people when they're given time to process that, but often they are the ones who are misinterpreted by neurotypical people, and that the autistic communication style isn't appreciated or understood by others. It's often that neurotypical people might assume that autistic people aren't interested or not empathetic when they are actually misinterpreting the way they do show those things. Autistic people often need a lot of clarity and predictability, particularly when they're interacting with other people. So they prefer the structured and predictable interactions. Expectations are clear, which is why things like clubs and activities can be really helpful because they do have those things. But many autistic people experience social exhaustion, just all that keeping up with the conversations, managing the social overwhelm and the sensory overwhelm, having to kind of work out what facial expressions are saying, the small talk, what is the point of it? And often that means that a person who may be able to mask for a while and cope with a social situation needs to then have absolute time of recovery afterwards, and they have like maybe a meltdown afterwards or just a complete withdrawal to be able to restore their batteries. It's the draining aspect of social exhaustion can be, especially when you think of children at school or adults at work, where every aspect of that is very socially demanding as well as doing the work as well. So, what we often see, though, in autistic people is there is a strong social motivation, that they really want connection with other people, but it just might show it differently. So, things like shared interests. We often find autistic children like parallel play, so playing alongside somebody rather than having to kind of share or interact with others. And, maybe just sitting and information sharing. I have an autistic friend who, for her 30th birthday, is having a PowerPoint sharing party just because her and her friends love that they've all got really interesting interests and are just giving themselves space to share that with everybody else. And that might seem strange to other people, but what joy that's bringing to that group. And therefore, a lot of the problem can be our expectations, our social expectations, and impact, and actually expecting autistic people to understand and join in the way that neurotypical people might. So, we've got to be aware that we can be part of that problem. This is a quote from one of our autistic young people. It's not that I don't want to be with people, it's that I need to be people with people who understand me. So this is just a connection to Dr. Damien Milton and his double empathy problem, which is backed up by research, talking about while it's true that autistic people can struggle to process and understand the intentions of others, remember how unpredictable they are within social interactions. When one listens to the accounts of autistic people, one could say such problems are in both directions. So let's have a look at the third area of thinking differences, thinking and learning. Autistic people, again, have a lot of potential and a whole range of abilities. And so some autistic people do have severe learning disabilities and high levels of need of support. They learn in very, very small chunks with needing lots of repetition. Others may have average or high or genius academic ability with strengths in particular areas. We often talk about having a spiky profile in schools where you can see areas of ability, but areas of also delayed development or areas that they just maybe not able to access. It's really important to think again that non-speaking doesn't mean non-thinking. So it's very common that non-speaking individuals understand far more than they can express, and they may use alternative methods to show their thinking. And again, we mustn't patronize them or talk down to them, but presume competence and make sure that we are giving them enough challenge and learning in the setting that they're in. Autistic thinking can show differences in perception of a situation. That could be because their experience has been very different from ours in that situation. It could be that their senses have been heightened or their senses are unresponsive. So they may have actually really struggled to notice anything because they've been trying to deal with the sensory overload, or they could be really good at noticing all the details. And we're looking maybe for an account of the bigger picture, which again, some autistic people may miss because of that. But again, we really need to understand their perceptions and believe them and affirm them in that, even if we also need to teach them a little bit about what else was going on to make the picture a little bit wider. Processing differences are really important to understand because for a lot of autistic people, some information can take longer to process, particularly if it's unfamiliar or new, or you're asking them to do a lot with the information that you've given them. Some of our autistic young people can think of everything that there is about something. Others struggle to make links between ideas. So when we're learning in school or at home or we're giving them instructions, we have to take account that it may take longer to process what it is you've asked. And again, that is important to know the individual person's processing speed. What's really important as well is to understand that some autistic people get things before everybody else as well, especially if it's something that they are tuned into and they understand. And so we have to take that into account as well. We often find that visual, concrete, or hands-on approaches often work better than things that are abstract. Again, we talk a lot about visuals for autistic people because they are that bit more concrete and they don't go away. They stay there while you have time to process. They give a pause, again, can be just as effective. Many autistic people approach problems in original, focus, or detail-driven ways, which can be a huge asset. It can take longer because they want to know everything about it and be thinking quite deeply about it. They may easily spot patterns or errors that others miss, again, particularly in their areas of interest. I talk about areas of interest because those are the things that we really need to be developing in our autistic young people, because those are the things they're going to excel at and also develop other skills through. We're going to come back to this later, but monotropic thinking is really about having a very deep and intense focus on one thing at a time. And that could be the special interests or a routine. So when something happens, they will have maybe a very clear track of how that thing should happen, especially because you've said, it's only going to take this long or it's going to be like this. And have to be very focused on that. So this means that change or switching attention becomes very difficult because this is the way in my head it's going to be, but now you want me to think of it that way, or you want me to change what I'm doing. And that shifting attention can take much, much longer. It means that we have to prepare and explain things a lot more, but that is the way that an autistic person needs in order to be able to adapt and be flexible within a situation. Unpredictable or immediate or kind of changes that just can't happen like that will just cause so much stress, and not warning them of those things can also do that. Many autistic people need predictability and routine, because they reduce that anxiety, they support that clear thinking and a clear plan of what's going to happen. And it again just enables them not to be overwhelmed or overcome with panic or anxiety because there is something that is unpredictable. We talk a lot about routines, particularly in providing a very clear visual routine throughout the day, but also routines can really help independence. So it helps an autistic person know what they're doing, how they're doing it, and it becomes a safe and predictable and comforting exercise throughout the day. And those are kind of like anchor points because not much in many situations stay the same. And so anchor points of routine are really important for many autistic people. And what we really want to see is strength-based learning for all autistic young people and adults. Within as they grow into adults, they can often choose careers that play to their strengths. But again, it just depends on employers understanding the way their brain works. But interests can be powerful motivators and learning tools. We should not be using them to dangle like a carrot for the person, say, if you do this preferred thing, you'll get this thing you do prefer, but actually to use their interests and strengths to learn and build up from that. Got loads of examples how we've done that with young people, and it really does build in that motivation and love of learning. So, autistic learners do thrive when education is adapted to their processing style and preferences. And as linking to some of the communication as well, repetition brings comfort and repetition brings like a grounding when things seem very overwhelming around them. So for those who repeat words or actions, and it could be, going out, they have to touch the doorpost 9 times before they can go out. That is a grounding repetition action, that a ritual in a way that actually enables them to take that step over the threshold into the new experience and unpredictable world. So again, it's really important to understand why that's happening and perhaps, just give them a little bit more time to do that because then the rest of your day will be better. So I've mentioned masking a few times, and we talk about masking as about being and every human being masks. I mean, people say that. However, for autistic people, they're in a very confusing and overwhelming world. And for those who mask, what they've learned very early on is how to act and mimic and copy and kind of work their way through what everybody else seems to find natural. But that takes an enormous amount of energy. So, Jodie Clark says here that for the autistic person, the extent of masking is deeper and more labor intensive than that of the non-autistic. It involves intense focus and holding back what is natural, overriding all of one's true self. And we know in young people that often the mask starts to unravel, the more pressure they're under. And we often find with, younger and younger children, unfortunately, that, it starts to unravel through anxiety, through terror, through not being able to go to school because they just haven't got the energy to keep that mask going. So it's very important that we affirm and we help autistic young people discover their own identity in a positive way. Not that they're broken or wrong, but actually they are a person who has these different kinds of skills and abilities, and sometimes it is the world around them that is causing them the stress. Very often it is because it's not adapting to them. There's some great books around, particularly Autism, Identity and Me by Rebecca Dufus, which is a great workbook to go through, especially if you've got time to do a little bit of the time. It's very affirming, written with autistic people, and one of my favourite resources for exploring. Yes, we should tell children they're autistic, but we should always do that within a framework of using very affirmative language. So the other area, so I just realised I need to minimize myself a little bit to look at this. So the other area is sensory integration differences. And again, we have a brain that takes in information from all the world around us. Every human being has different sensory profile. So our vision, hearing, smell, taste and touch are our external senses where that information from the community and environment around us comes into our brain. Our brain has to moderate and modulate and make sense of that information. And often autistic people can find that quite overwhelming, be hypersensitive, where the senses are very strong and intense. And it's very often seen in, putting their hands over the ears, having to wear sunglasses or a cap because the light is too bright. Lighting is a big, big issue for many autistic people. Again, smells, taste, touch can really impact on all of their lives. We also have three internal senses. So our sense of balance, our body awareness, where our body is in space. It's called proprioception. It's where our brain and our central nervous system talks to our muscles and our joints to know where the body is and coordinate it, move along. It's very often that those who are diagnosed dyspraxic or developmental coordination disorder, it's called now, have poor proprioception awareness. I've known children who have no concept of their own body, especially behind. And it's really important that we do help them build that healthy body awareness from a very young age, because by the time they hit the puberty years and their body's going to grow and change, we already know that change is very overwhelming for autistic people. So we need to be able to make sure that they have a good grounding in where their body is and what it's like in order to help prepare them for that. Another area is our interoception. So our internal organs. This again is your central nervous system talking to your internal organs, giving messages back. Are you wanting to go to the toilet? Are you hungry? How's your heart beating? A lot of those are automatic things. But a really important thing to remember too is that our interoception is also the indicator of our emotions. So a really simple example is that when you're nervous, you might get fluttering inside your tummy. There is no butterflies, I promise you. And that fluttering is a message to your brain to say that I'm feeling nervous. So your brain has interpreted that. However, in autistic people, again, there's a whole range from those who are hypersensitive to their emotions, including everybody's emotions around them, to those who have something we call alexithymia, which means that the messages from those internal organs don't really register in the brain. So it can affect how they eat, how they sleep, their toileting, but also their emotional awareness. There could be delay in that processing or no registering at all. So we have that whole range within autistic people. Okay. There is also something called stimming, which is very common in autistic people again, and it's repetitive movements, which again brings some really important regulation for that person in their body, in their senses, and particularly things like rocking or flapping are very good for proprioception and jumping. But there could be all kinds of stimulating, self-stimulating behaviors. It could be noises, it could be words, it could be singing. And it's an important part of an autistic person's ability to regulate themselves. So, getting to what we call a zone or a window of tolerance to be able to cope with what's going on around them. So, we don't try to stop these things. If it becomes something that's self-harming, then we would really try and find out why they feel that distress, what sensory information it's giving them, and try obviously to replicate that in a more safe way. This is what I mean about the range of autism and sensory reactions. So, as human beings, we have this window of tolerance of what we can tolerate. Some of us can tolerate the whooshing and the movement of a roller coaster. Other people would go nowhere near it because it would just make them too sick, even looking at it. And therefore, that difference is somebody who can cope with all that extra stimulation, and people who can't even contemplate it is just part of our range within human beings. We've all got our window of tolerance. So for autistic people, we really need to understand their ability to tolerate environments and even instructions and the people interactions, because that makes a big difference. You can have very different reactions on different days, depending on your mood, the time of the month, what's gone on beforehand. And there's a great theory around that some autistic people use about having enough spoons, and those are units of energy. And the more spoons you have, the more you can tolerate. So it may be that you've got enough spoons to go and tolerate a busy fairground because you like the rides. However, that uses up the spoons, and there is less tolerance the next day for absolutely anything. For those who might be over responsive, the reactions could look like sensory defensiveness. So they're avoiding things. They might be complaining, hiding, saying they've got headaches, heads on tables, hands on ears. They might just be suffering in silence. They might be feeling sick, angry, and it can lead to meltdown. And a meltdown we'll look at in a moment, but really is not just like I got slightly distressed and upset. It's an absolute brain intolerance where the brain has had just too much. The world is intolerable and they cannot cope or function. If somebody is under responsive, or we can call the hyper at the top or hypo underneath, but they may be non-responsive to something. You can tap them on the shoulder and then they're not responding to that. We might call that sensory seeking. So they need more in order to feel that sensation. It might be fidgeting, moving, swinging, doodling, chewing. They might seem really sluggish because nothing's really responding to the sensory things around them. They may seem quite overtired a lot, sort of leaning on things all the time, struggling to cope with darker or maybe even patterned environments. They may seem quite oppositional because they're saying no in any way they can. It's too much or not enough. They may be hot, bored, or they may shut down. Now, shutdowns and meltdowns are very similar. So sensory overload is probably one of the key behavior kind of indicators. I think we often, when we are asked about children's behavior or even adults in different circumstances, we will always say, what are their sensory overload in that situation? Because it's very, very common. And this quote, again, from one of the young people, that her senses are constantly being assaulted by noise, too bright light, smells, movement. There's never any quiet where I can just calm my brain down for a few minutes. Then I get in trouble for hitting out at someone who pushed past me just because I couldn't stand any more of this. So again, it's really important then we look at behaviours that seem a challenge to us or that they're challenging others, that we actually understand that there's a lot going on underneath that and look at it through the autism lens. So, just to summarize a little bit about autistic girls, often autistic girls do seem to have more social ability. And that's often because, as maskers, they are watching and analyzing other people around them and copying what other people do in order to fit in. It's not that they're picking up social skills and knowledge naturally from within the environment as neurotypical children do, but it's a huge effort. So they're often seen as fine in school, and then they often can explode at home and or be very, very anxious at home as they're internalizing all that anxiety. So many girls in the past have been missed and misdiagnosed, so that leads to greater risk of mental ill health, including eating disorders, which can be quite different in autistic girls. And because their needs haven't been recognised or met, often parents can be blamed. If you want to know a lot more about this, there's loads of stuff out there, particularly something like the Autistic Girls Network, and this book for educators that I've contributed a chapter to, looking at education and girls on the autistic spectrum is really a good read as well. So, when we're looking at how we support autistic people, it really is about creating the right environment for them. We talk about neurodiversity and biodiversity and talking about, plants and animals need different environments to thrive. Well, why are human beings different from that? We don't all thrive in the same environment. Dr. Luke Bearden has done some amazing books around autism and around anxiety and autism. And his key quote is autism plus environment equals outcome. So, not having the right environmental support can cause intense anxiety. Autistic children grow up to be autistic adults. They're always going to be autistic, and they have such potential to thrive. And some may need continued support, either for that daily living or accessing the workplace. But if they understand themselves and they have the right environment, then they can really thrive. Those who have significant higher needs, maybe daily living needs, are not to be forgotten or put in a shared living home and then kind of just left. They continue to grow and they continue to learn. They continue to need stimulating and safe experiences in order to live a life as much as they can thrive within that situation as well. So it's important that, again, we think about the whole autistic spectrum within this. I mentioned earlier around meltdowns and shutdowns. Some autistic people describe these as a little bit like a computer crash. So the processor, the brain, crashes. And at that moment, the person is unable to process anything. So safety is really important. And it might be looking like fight, flight, or freeze. The person might be fighting their way out of the panic, or the shutdown or the meltdown, or they may be freezing or shutting down, as we mentioned. So it's really important to reduce any sensory overload around them, and that includes talking. We can't really talk somebody out or reason them out of a really distressing and intolerable situation. So often we say to people, be silent and just soothe or give them something that is soothing, making sure they're safe and give them time to recover from that overload. And it is, in a way, in a very simplistic way, like switching your computer off and letting it reboot. And that's what the brain needs to do. And for some people, that can take 5 minutes. Sometimes it can take 5 days or more. So it's really important, again, to understand meltdowns are not tantrums. Shutdowns, again, or maybe with extreme withdrawal, but actually the person's not being awkward or rude. They are in distress, and it's important that we help them through that. Now, I really have to recommend this video on monotropism. There isn't time within this presentation to talk about it, but work done by Fergus Murray, his mother Dinah Murray started this off, and it's been taken up by lots of other autistic kind of researchers as well. This video, on monotropism.org, has also lots of other really helpful information. I said earlier that monotropism is like having that intense single track focus. And when an autistic person is in the flow of that, they can do all kinds of things, be full of joy and really get into a topic or in a situation that they're really, managing very well. But very often things fracture that, and it often is either somebody interrupting or trying to do something different, making a change. So it's a really good video to watch about that. It's a great one to play in a staff room. It's about 7 minutes long, I think. So, as we finish off, I want to kind of just come together and think the most important thing you could do, especially if you're new to the kind of understanding autism, is to really explore what autistic people are saying. And they're all different, so they might say different things. But generally, the autistic community can teach us a lot about, kind of bad experiences that they have that we can avoid, and also give you a lot of insight in how to support young people, young adults and older people, right through to the elderly who are autistic, by listening to what autistic people are saying. There's some great people here. Some of them are my real personal friends, people I speak to regularly and who I have learned a lot from. And I would really like to include in all the wonderful young people, the children that I've worked with over the years, because again, they have been great teachers for me. And don't forget those who do not use verbal language. One of the best books I would recommend is The Reason I Jump, because again, it just really helps you understand the kind of inside world of somebody who's autistic and who doesn't use speech. But there are other people there, books and blogs that you can access to listen to that. And I think we do need to understand the whole autistic spectrum, even when somebody may be at a different part of this spectrum. There are insights from everybody that can just connect people together. So here are some websites. I mentioned my own website there, but there's good websites and a YouTube video there. I want to just introduce you to issues around autism and gender identity. Again, haven't had time, but we think around 30 or more percent of autistic people are LGBTQ, have gender identity differences, and there's lots of reasons for that. So again, that's a different video, a different training course, but please be aware to consider that in your understanding of autistic people. There are some really good websites around where parents can go to for good parenting ideas and affirming your child, and Autistic Realms. Helen Edgar there has great resources, particularly around autistic burnout. If you've got a young person who's struggling in school, again, some really good information there. And Kelly Marler, great place to go to learn about interoception. Really flag up the Autism Understood website by Spectrum Gaming, a great website to helping us understand autism from the young people who are part of Spectrum Gaming. They've all contributed to that. And I mentioned earlier the Autistic Girls Network. There is no male or female autism, but so boys can mask as well. But there are more girls who mask. And again, the research around that is developing. So I just want to finish with saying, there's so much more I can share about autism and the lives of autistic people, including how to best support autistic children in education and life, because that is where we come from. But also, I do work with churches, with the social workers, I do families, with foster carers, and even with companies and businesses, because autistic people are part of our society, and actually they can really learn to thrive if we give them the right environment, and they can contribute so much to the world. They already have. So we've only given you this, I've only had a bit of time to give you this short introduction. Please keep learning, listening, and be affirming to the autistic people you know. Thank you very much.